morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us again on another segment of Java Chat with Film Incentive Friends. I'm Marco Cordova, along with some expert panelists. I have here Nicole Amlin, Deidre Owens, Brian Broussard, David Brower, and Marge Gallus. Today, we're going to talk about Eastern states. Obviously, the first and foremost state that people want to talk about is Georgia. That's where most of the filming is on the motion picture side. I know there's been a lot of rules regarding Georgia, a lot of changes the past couple of years. We have here David Brower, who's actually one of the few eligible CPA auditors under the new mandatory audit program. So David, can you give us some more insight on some of the recent changes and what producers should look after when filming in Georgia?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, it is now, since the start of 2021, if your credit is 2.5 million or higher, then you need to go through a mandatory audit. You can either do that with a CPA firm and the Georgia DOR or just the Georgia DOR. And what they've come out with now is a very intense audit procedures manual, as well as supporting documentation for that as to exactly what the expectations are now for Georgia. From payroll to non-payroll vendor requirements, whether or not somebody's working on a filming site or not. I will say that it is extremely detailed. I would highly recommend talking with experts, including everyone on this panel, before you venture into Georgia, because a lot has changed and continues to change, even with what's required to prove that somebody is a Georgia vendor. You now have to get a local business license if you're spending a certain amount with a local business, which does not come from the Secretary of State, but will come from the city of the jurisdiction that the person is working in. And it's also extremely important that you get very detailed in how you're keeping your records, because as of right now, there are certain things that we have to look at 100% of, which could be hotels or per diems. There's very specific asset requirements now that we have to take a look at. And I will tell you that on the non-payroll items, we're going to be looking at a significant amount of transactions and verifying whether or not those obviously took place in Georgia, but whether or not they are in fact a Georgia vendor that incurred those costs. So it's some of the information is similar to what people have seen in Georgia. Certain of cap, a $500,000 of W-2 wages is still there. No cap on loan outs, as long as the loan outs are working in Georgia and meet the other requirements and have withholding tax, which is now 5.75%. We will go through in a lot of detail on those loan outs to make sure that the work was being performed in Georgia, and go through their agreements as well to make sure that if the production takes place outside of Georgia, that it's properly allocated.
Yeah, and Georgia, as David mentioned, is still very popular. Obviously, there's been a very long delay with getting new credits issued. Being that my company is the largest broker in Georgia for film credits, we're being hounded every day for more Georgia film credits, and the state's not issuing them fast enough. And I think part of that is, with the changes with the new rules, with COVID delays. Last year, a couple of the DOR auditors left who were working on the DOR audits. And then also the changing rules, I think, has really delayed the process. This also is an opportunity for productions to capitalize on the amount you're getting for Georgia. So Georgia before was selling in the mid 80-cent range, and now you're seeing more in the 90-cent range, 90 cents plus. So I definitely still encourage people to shoot in Georgia if you're looking for a great state where they have unlimited cap on the funding, and also they still qualify above the line and no restrictions on residency. So
one thing I'll say, Marco, that's changed also under the new guidelines, which you're aware of, is you can't utilize or transfer this credit now until your audit is finalized. So that changes the tax year in which you can sell this credit or utilize this credit, which I know has affected how you deal with your clients and selling these credits as well.
Yeah, and that's changing the volume of amount of credits available. Like usually by this time, we'll have plenty of 2021 credits. under the new program because, as David mentioned, you have to wait until the credit's certificated or issued by the DOR. If they're not certificated until this year, they're going to be 2022 credits. Some might even be pushed to 2023, and obviously that could lower the pricing. The more later tax years you're looking at, the pricing gets a little bit lowered. So, yeah, and as far as we talked about earlier about COVID-related costs, is there something that you want to clarify about Georgia compared to other jurisdictions?
So as of today, direct COVID-related costs do not qualify for the incentive. Anything from your
We better
PP,
date that. We better date it, right? February 3rd, 2022, because as you mentioned, things are always changing, right?
that possibly could change, but as of the recording of this panel, directly related COVID costs do not qualify. PPE purchases, testing, COVID coordinator, anything that is a direct expense for maintaining COVID protocols on the production will not qualify.
That's a big one. Marco, I'm curious, because you mentioned that it's gone up again, like from your perspective. And when I remember there was a time where it got pretty low, in terms of supply and demand in Georgia. How early do you see that turn? And I mean, obviously the state is still very busy, right? We still know the big powerhouse studios that are there and working there. So you would think the surplus is still there. How soon in advance, and this is actually a good question for Deidre too, is how important this is in place, because I know you guys work together a lot when she's loaning, against a tax credit, for example, in Georgia, and she's, wants to know, like, how much, can you turn it into real cash? How far in advance do you know, is it going to take the turn? Is it going to jump from 85 to low 90s? Do you know, a month or two ahead of time? Do you say this is like the forecast of the credits, or is it just kind of happening, on the fly and you just kind of see it and now it's here?
Well, right now the credits are selling in the 90 cent plus range, depending on the tax year. The earlier the tax year, we're actually seeing some people buying, there's some very wealthy families that are buying 50 million plus in credits just for one family. And that could
Wow.
be, several projects. There's very few projects that have that capacity. Also, kind of COVID related, and also one thing to mention, given that the current administration, people were suspecting that they might increase taxes for capital gains taxes, and that encouraged a lot of individuals, wealthy individuals, and also businesses to sell some large assets, and that accelerated or sell their business before the end of last year, and that accelerated the need for more credits. So expecting higher tax rates, higher capital gains rates for individuals, those are all contributing factors to higher pricing. Also, you're seeing, less productions because of COVID. But again, there's still many shows in Georgia. It's just a matter of waiting and getting their certificates. And Deidre, I think,
Yeah.
from your experience and dealing with Georgia productions, do you see a slowdown in people wanting to shoot in Georgia because of the
I
changes,
think
or?
people are branching out. I don't know exactly why, because a lot of these things that we're talking about are not things that independent producers are particularly hip to. So it's like I don't think concerns about uncertainty won't necessarily cause producers to choose one state over another. But I think probably I think it's they're looking for where they can get crew, where they can get financing. People are still lending against Georgia tax credits. I do, if the credit for us, certainly, if the credit is not sold to a third party, we're going to have to lend a lot less, because now the price is up to 90. But a few years ago the price was up to 90, and then not that long later it was down to sort of closer to 85. So there's a lot of the market sort of changes depending on, obviously, supply and demand. But it's true. So I think in any state with a transferable credit, the preference for any lender is that you sort of have an agreement in place ahead of time with a local taxpayer to buy it at a certain price, so we can at least lock in the price. But sometimes that isn't possible, depending on the marketplace, and so then that would just impact how much. I think lenders will need to be a little more conservative if they don't have that certainty.
Yeah, especially.
Deidre, what are you doing as a financier now that they split the 30% into basically two different certificates that you're going to
That's
get?
a great point with the 10%,
20,
right?
and then the 20% is coming from the DOR, and then the 10% for the promotion is coming from the film office. What are you as a financier doing? Are you financing the full 30? Are you breaking it up?
So, it's a good question, because actually I haven't closed something in Georgia since that change. Sort of our approach, when we've been discussing potential Georgia projects, has been if you want, the loan against that last 10%, certainly like you need to have demonstrated that at least you can meet the criteria required for distribution. If you don't have the distribution yet, and that's something you plan on getting later, we can't lend against it. So it kind of depends on the project. It's sort of how we were planning on.
And what about you, Mark?
And I think-
Same kind of question on selling the credit. You're getting two different certificates.
Yeah,
What are you
doing,
doing?
sir?
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, we just make sure we look at the tax year of the credit, because that will dictate the pricing. So as long as it's the same tax year, which should be for the project, if they meet both requirements, then that's what we base our pricing on.
So you're seeing the 20%, and then separately in a different sale, you're seeing the 10 come in maybe even a different year.
We haven't seen that yet.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think that's, those are under the new rules where they're kind of looking, first of all, the 10% program that's always been administered by the film office or the economic development office. They're the ones who actually provide a stamp on the application indicating if you get qualified for the 10% uplift. The 20% program has always been administered by the Department of Revenue. It's still my understanding, though, that once they issue the certificate, the DOR will award the entire 10 and 20% on the same certificate. And I don't think that's going to change, but I know that they're going to be stricter on the 10% uplift and make sure that you have distribution. I've heard some people checking, whether or not, the Georgia Peach logo is on the end title crawl. I've heard, in the streaming service. So, there's just going to be a little bit more stricter in making sure that the production gets distribution in order to get the 10% uplift.
So what that
It is a
tells
little
me is that timing is moving. The timing has
Yeah,
shifted.
the timing is affecting the pricing. I think one piece of advice I have for you guys, and David alluded to this earlier, right now there's a phase in. So if your credit is less than 2.5 million for 2021, and it gets reduced to 1.25 million, if it's less than 1.25 million for 2022, you're not required to go through the mandatory audit. So my suggestion for these smaller projects is to go through one of the eligible auditors that could still do what you call an agreed upon procedures report, because they could spit those out, possibly a year faster than you would have to wait for a mandatory audit.
And that mandatory audit requirement is based on the year that it's approved by the film office. So everyone knows.
Yeah, so there's also a process when you're applying for Georgia credit, you have to actually choose in the Georgia Tax Center. If you're doing a mandatory audit, you could choose who your eligible auditor is. And I'm also hearing that there's some delays, even if someone chooses, for example, David Brower, the DOR has to assign the project to David Brower, and there could be also delays in just doing that process. So I think
and that assignment doesn't happen until you're completely done with your Georgia spend.
and
They will not let you even sign up for the mandatory audit unless you're completely done, because it just, as we stated in an earlier state, you have one shot to submit your ledger to the state of Georgia. We run it through a statistical sampling, and however the results farm out, you cannot say, oh, we want to make some changes and resubmit. They're pretty strict on having a final ledger for us to start our process. And they do have now some timelines where it's 60 days to get all of our information, initial information to the CPA firm. And then once we make our selections, I think it's another 60 days or so to get all of our selections. So they're trying to move it along as fast as possible. But again, there's quite a bit of information that we are going to go through. So I caution everyone not to sign up for the mandatory audit until you're absolutely sure you're ready to go through this Georgia audit.
Yeah,
That was
so
another change, right? Is they didn't they put restrictions in terms of you mentioned timing and the last penny of spending. Didn't they
Yeah.
change that as well? Where they said, what is it, like 6 weeks after your production office closes? That's it. Like you get that window in terms of cost.
Correct. And
after.
it's 4 weeks on the front end from when you open your production office.
So David sent me a letter today where he's now on a show of mine. He's now the auditor. So I finally got my very first sort of DOR, David Brower's your auditor on your show today. But prior to that rule coming out about the 60 days you have to be done, I had filed for the mandatory audit. So I put the mandatory audit application, I requested David Brower on it, and it's now taken us months to get this letter back, but the rule for the 60 days didn't come in before I filed that. And so now I'm in this place with my show where I filed for the audit to have David be my auditor, but we're well over the 60 days. I mean, we're almost like 4 or 5 months ahead. And
Well,
so
technically
I believe
it's
I'll be
60
okay.
days from it's 60 days from today, because today is when we got
You got
notified.
it. So not from the application, from the receipt of, because that's new. Because it used
Yeah,
to be
my
from the
understanding
application.
is it's 60 days of when
Okay.
they notify the auditors as well
Oh,
as the production. And I
Well, that's
think
good.
you should have gotten another email that says, here's our initial document request list, number
The
one.
IDR. I don't know that I got the IDR yet, but okay,
Okay.
because the last we had on this particular show talked about it, I had filed the application and thought it was 60 days from that, but that has now changed. Is that something that I didn't miss it? I'm sure it changed somewhere in their discussions after.
I think they're finalizing everything now, so I don't want to speak
Okay.
out of turn.
So whether the
But
60
let's just
days,
say you have 60 days.
what is the 60 days that you're talking about? Is it the deadline for which to pass
It's the deadline to
information?
submit the initial request, the document request to the CPA firm.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
from there, you have 60 days to get your initial information in. Then we'll go through our process of testing and selections. And then we'll send our selections. Then you have another time that starts providing all the selection support.
Okay.
Okay.
So just
You have to
wanted
have
to,
everything done, Deidre.
yeah.
Everything has to be ready, which is what David is saying. Don't file your application to say that you want him as your auditor until like you're done.
You're done.
Everybody,
Right.
just say you want David as your.
No, but is
I mean,
there,
that works well
is there a deadline between when you finish spending money, which I guess has to be within 4 weeks of closing your office, or how
That's
many?
to qualify. That's
Right, to qualify, but then is
That's a
there any
qualified period.
deadline between when you actually make your spend and when you have to apply to get an auditor assigned?
Not that I'm aware of offhand,
Okay.
but then you're starting to filter into different tax years depending on
Yeah, I'm not,
when you
I'm
want
just,
to utilize your credit.
right, I'm just thinking for productions that might have accounting cleanup to do, I'm just wondering if there's some hard and fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Uh,
never
limits.
been, there's never been a requirement in Georgia for that, like when you have to be done, essentially. So it's just open, it's really just open-ended there. You would
Right.
file when. you're-
It'll just
They did-
impact
they
what
did
the
change
year
the-
of your credit and when you can
Yeah.
actually, when it's, which impacts the marketability, et cetera, and when you'll actually get it. to
Yeah.
I
be able
think
to
they
sell.
did change the applicant time though on the front end, which is something people should be aware of. I don't think it used to. Now you have to turn it in before principal photography ends.
Yeah, it's, I think
Um,
60 days, they're being a little bit more strict about that.
Mhm.
So 60 or 90 days. So you have to make sure that you're not over that time frame. But that's great on Georgia. Obviously, there's still a lot of filming in Georgia.
Yeah, old Penn.
We could talk hours and hours about Georgia, but I wanted to move on before.
We don't want David to charge us, Marco. We don't want a bill from David, so we have to move on.
No
Yeah.
charge, no charge.
The next state, which I know David is also one of the auditors, is New York, and you were very involved with some of their guidelines for New York. Is there anything you could tell us? I know New York is one of the states that a lot of larger productions are complaining about, waiting, sometimes years to get their money. Other shows I've heard are able to get their money quicker. Is there something that you could give us some more insight about New York?
Well, New York is a hugely successful program, and because of that, they implemented the voluntary CPA audits about 8 years ago or so, or maybe 7 years ago, where you could hire a third-party CPA to try to expedite you getting your tax credit certificate. That program became a huge success as well. And the way New York works is they start allocating tax years until they hit their 420 million, and then they'll go on to the next tax year. So what's happening in New York is they'll start allocating future tax years at some point where you won't be able to utilize or obtain that. It's actually not a credit, but you actually get a rebate back from the state. So you file your tax return, the state will send you money back depending on how big your rebate is. They'll split it up over a couple of years. But what will happen eventually is if you film in 2022 and you submit for the voluntary CPA audit, we do our audit work, submit it to the state. The state now is taking a little bit longer than a year, about 18 months to review that final application. And by that point, you may get a tax credit certificate that's dated 2024, which you won't be able to utilize until you file your 2025 tax return.
Wow.
Which, if you're a traditional calendar year, will not be till the first quarter of 2026.
And actually, even if you're not, it would be even later, because the way New York determines the fiscal year, it's when the fiscal year starts. So if you have like any year end that isn't December, it'll start in the prior year. So, if you have December, 2025, that's the 25 fiscal year. If you have November 2025, that's a 24 fiscal year because it started in December 1st, 2024. So December, the earliest you'll get your credit is by having a December year end. And again, if you have a December, whatever fiscal year your credit is, you claim it on the next year, which means it's really, you receive it in the year after that because,
And
you'll
also
file your claim in the early next, year.
And also you have to wait until 3 years usually, because they for larger credits, they split up the payments. And I think 5 million's the threshold.
If it's over 5 million, you get it.
Yeah, you get it over 3 years.
Tax years.
So that could even, prolong the process, obviously. So that's just something I wanted to mention and kind of warn people about New York. I think people who are actively filming there know about these rules, but just wanted to mention this in case anyone
I was going to say
familiar.
When we get an independent project kickoff call in New York, or somebody reaches out to us to ask us about the New York program, the first thing I tell them is about the time value of money and when they should set their expectations.
Right. And then
They just said that, that's for sure. I mean, another thing with New York, I have a client in New York right now, is they just recently, well, not them themselves, but Syracuse. But what county is that? I can never say it. It starts with an O, right? They have
Onondaga.
I always want to say Oingo Boingo.
I went to college there.
I don't know why, but I do. But it's, they have their own, they changed their incentive recently. And the client I have in New York is going to get the New York credit, and then they're going for the upstate bonus through the New York State. And then they'll be able to get the one in Syracuse as well. So it's really kind of cool. Obviously they got to wait a while for some of these things, but the fact that now that local credit, and we didn't talk too much about local credits, but a lot of states have local credits with local counties or parishes or whatever. The fact that doesn't net out of the state like it used to is really great, because people can really fully capitalize if they're an upstate and if they're in that county. So that's fairly new and something interesting that I have an independent actually going for.
Yeah, Ryan, I did an upstate grant recently as well, but who had to approve the grant for the like Syracuse was the state.
Well, it's fun. In their rules and regulations, it says that in order to get this, you have to get the New York.
Yeah.
So you can't get that one.
You're
A lot
still
of
at the
local,
mercy of their timing, essentially, in the state.
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you still,
Oh.
many of the local ones like Florida, while we're on the East Coast, Florida doesn't have an incentive for the state, but they have a lot of local ones. They have Tampa and, a few Miami-Dade or whatever it is, and a few others, Fort Lauderdale, these little local ones that exist outside of the state. This one is the only local incentive I know where you have to get the state incentive in order to get the local incentive.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
so it
if
could
they
get
don't net
held
out-
up. The point being, it could get held up at the state level, just from them just being too busy to look at it.
So,
Yeah.
so the state needs to approve it?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they get sent all of the, the GL, like whatever you're requesting, and then the state will review what the jurisdiction sent them, Syracuse or whichever county sent it to them. Yes, and they review it and then they approve it, and then you can get your grant money. But again, it still sits in the state's hands for quite some time.
So that would be similar to the up to 18 months.
No, I
Okay.
don't think it'll be that bad.
Okay.
I think there is a difference between that timing, but it still
Okay.
could be held up for several months.
Okay.
When you think you're going to get cash and you don't get that cash for 6
Right.
months.
Okay.
It's just-
Got it.
It's not 18 months, but
Right.
this-
It's not the same timeline for the review of
no, the
the.
18 months is outrageous. Yeah.
Okay. I think we have one more state before we shut down on this segment. It's New Jersey. New Jersey is a newer program. They actually had an older program, and now they kind of restarted this a couple years back. And I haven't seen that many certificates issued actually for this program since 2020.
Did you say two, Ryan? There's
I
only.
didn't. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
Okay, sorry.
I've seen two. I've seen two. I don't know, but I know that I have a lot of clients that are there.
But
that
there's
are
only
going
two.
for it, so I don't know.
There's going to be a lot more coming here in the
I
next
think there's
couple
a
months.
lot.
I'll tell you that.
I think David. can
Well,
talk
one
to
of
this.
them
I
is
think
the
there was a lot
Joker,
of back
right?
and
Like,
forth.
if I'm not mistaken, which was.
I don't know if that one was issued or not. I didn't work on that one.
Yes.
I think part of the reason was not necessarily a delay on New Jersey's part, but there was some uncertainty
Confusion.
about what would qualify. So
Mhm.
people didn't want to submit something without knowing, if they had the right rules. And so I think I'm hearing
And they also
anecdotally that some
changed-
productions held things back while they awaited clarity so they could maximize.
Yeah, there was definitely some clarity, and on the audit side, initially they wanted us to look at 100% of every transaction, going down to a 7-Eleven receipt. But since then, the program has changed, and it's now the vendor requirement and the audit requirement now have eased, and
Mhm.
it's a lot. I would say it's easier than the initial iteration of the program, and I think you'll see a lot more people kind of crossing over from New York to New Jersey and back and forth. We've worked on quite a bit of shows that are cross-border shows in both jurisdictions, where you can get, depending on the requirements, the initial requirements of spend, you can get both credits. And I think you're going to see a lot more taking place in New Jersey. The issue you will run into there is their cap on how much they're allocating. And I think they are going to do something similar to other states where they're going to start allocating future periods as well. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, it seems like every
Right.
year they come out with a new bill that, I mean, it betters the program. They just came out with something, I think, just this past month or so, where it ups their digital media to
Mhm.
the percentage that their feature in TV were allocated at. So it just seems like every time I look at like current pending bills or whatever, they're on it, and it's usually towards the better, which is good. So they're obviously hungry to make their program very good. We mentioned another panel, they have that like film partner, I don't remember what they call theirs, where they want people to have infrastructure there, grow infrastructure there, and they're willing to give them certain, advantages with regards to the incentive. So
Yeah.
I think it's going to keep changing and growing in the better.
Yeah, and I think as David mentioned, more people are just shooting in New Jersey. Obviously,
Mhm.
there's a lot of experienced crew there since a lot of the New York crew is from New Jersey. So that helps a lot. And then, we talked earlier about sound stages. There seems to be more soundstage development in the state. So I'm getting a lot of calls, obviously, for people wanting to sell their credit or at least line up buyers in the future. And that's one of the most popular states right now, newer states, as far as people wanting to sell their credit.
Mhm.
And I'll say Steve Gorlick, the film commissioner there in New Jersey, is great to reach out to. He's a big
Mhm.
help for productions.
Great.
Yeah, he's great.
Okay, well, that concludes our Eastern states. And stay tuned. We're going to talk lastly and conclude with some advice and also some other tips. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned.